Hello! So this Xcode tutorial is going to be a little different than the ones you've seen before, because I'm going to show you how to use Xcode in the context of iOS app development. And that means that every Xcode function and feature that I show you, you'll know why it's important and how we use it for app development. Alright, let's dive right in. So first of all, let's talk about where to get Xcode. And by far, the easiest way is just to open up the Mac App Store on your Mac and search for Xcode. Should be the first listing here. Click into it and yours will say install, whereas mine says open because I've got it installed. And in terms of getting this installed, the requirements, if you don't have the right Mac OS version, it'll tell you up here. And then it's just a matter of updating your OS in order to install Xcode. The other thing is size requirements. So downloading this requires 3.4 gigs, but in my experience, it's going to take up a lot more hard drive space once you've got it installed. So I would even budget for double this because there are additional components you need to download depending on which platforms you want to build for. As you can see, you can use Xcode to build for iOS, iPad, tvOS, watch, Vision OS, even Mac computers. So this is official Apple software, and this is the only tool recommended by Apple for us to build apps for all of their platforms. That's why it is #1 on the chart for developer tools. It has terrible ratings, I will admit, because Xcode can sometimes be buggy, as evidenced by these reviews, but you can mitigate that a little bit by not using the beta versions of Xcode. So if you happen to have a developer friend or access to the developer portal where you can get access to an early release of Xcode 16, let's say, because this is Xcode 15, I would not use the beta simply because it's going to be even more buggy. There's less support for it. Some of the tutorials and videos that you find online to learn Xcode with will not be covering the betas, and so on and so forth. So this is by far my recommended way to get Xcode. All right, so go ahead and download and install Xcode, and then let's see how we can start a brand new app project. So hopefully you got Xcode installed without a hitch. It does ask you for your computer administrative password at a couple of points during the installation to install additional components. Go ahead and allow Xcode to do that if you want it to function properly. Okay, so what we're talking about here is Xcode version 15.2, but to be honest with you, the Xcode interface and how it works doesn't really change that much from version to version. So if you're out there looking for tutorials and documentation and videos, and you find a video for Xcode 14 or Xcode 13, chances are you'll still be able to follow along with the newer versions of Xcode anyways. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to create a brand new iOS app project, and I'm going to show you all of the different features and how to use Xcode through the context of building an app. And I think that would actually help you understand better about why we do certain things rather than just running through all of the features and functions. And then I don't think it'll stick in your head as well. So go ahead, click create new project, and let's go through some of these new project options. Now up here, there are all of these different platforms you can build for. In this video, we're going to be building an iOS app, or at least that is the context for which we're learning Xcode. Let's choose under iOS, let's choose app and click next. And let's give this a name. So we're going to call it Xcode demo. The next option has to do with which team or which account you want to use, because sometimes if you are, let's say, working for a company, you might have a company account, and then when you want to build apps for another company or your personal apps, you might choose a different team. So that's where you do that. Organization identifier combined with the product name forms the bundle identifier, which is the unique ID for your app. So as you can see, the organization identifier, the format usually goes like this: com, dot, and then your company name or your personal name or whatever nickname, whatever you want to use. And then followed by dot, your product name. There's no spaces, so the space in my product name got turned into a dash. Altogether, your organization identifier plus the product name forms your bundle identifier. This is a unique ID for this app that you're building. Okay, so interface this talks about what technology or framework you want to use to build the user interface for your app, the screens essentially. SwiftUI is most likely what you want to choose here because that is Apple's preferred platform now. Storyboard was the OG, if you will, the original framework used to build user interfaces, and then Apple released SwiftUI, which they are developing, and they're moving forward with it. And I mean, it's been out for 5 years or so, so it's, you know, it's in a good spot. I would choose SwiftUI if you're trying to future-proof your skills. There probably will be some jobs that still require Storyboard, but as Apple improves SwiftUI and continues to work on it, everyone's going to be moving to SwiftUI. Okay, so language should only be Swift here. If you choose Storyboard, you might get another option called Objective-C. And again, this is sort of the OG version of the programming language, what you use to, you know, code and express the app logic. If you want to use the latest and greatest, you're going to choose SwiftUI and Swift. And as you can see, SwiftUI only gives you the option to use Swift. So for storage, we're not going to choose anything here. Storage is, these are both options to have local databases on your device for your app. This is not something we're going to go through in this lesson, so we are going to choose none, and we're going to also leave all this unchecked. That's all you need to configure for your new project. Let's click Next, and we're going to choose a place to save it. I'm just going to save it on the desktop so I can easily access it. You probably want to create an apps folder somewhere on your computer where you're going to keep all your apps organized. For source control, we are not going to enable this either. This is something else that we can probably cover in a future lesson, but it is a way to have some sort of versioning. It's a way to keep different copies or snapshots of your code in your project organized so that you can always go forward and backward across those different snapshots of code. But it does require a little bit of a learning curve, so we're going to go through that in a future video. Okay, let's go ahead and click Create, and it's going to create a folder of files, and then it's going to show you your new project here. I know personally when I first encountered this on my first project, I was quite overwhelmed. So I want to briefly explain the main areas of Xcode, and then we're going to dive into each one in the context of navigating through your app and starting to work on your app. So first of all, let's start all the way on the left. This long pane, this is called the Navigator area, which is mainly where you're going to be navigating through your project files and different issues and things like that. To the right of the Navigator, you have the Editor area. Now this actually spans the whole part of these two panes right here. It's this biggest area of Xcode because this is where you're going to edit your files. We're going to write your code, we're going to build your user interface, and so on. Now, currently, the editor area is split into two different views. As you can see, one is a code editor view, and on the right-hand side, you have the canvas, which is a preview of what your screen or your view is going to look like as represented by the code on the left-hand side. We'll dive into that in a little bit, I promise you. To the right of the canvas, you have another long strip called the inspector area. And this is where you can configure little details about either your files or certain things in the code or certain pieces of user interface elements in your preview. Again, we'll also dive a little deeper into that later. Across the top, you have your toolbar, and this is where you're going to control your app. You can run your app from here. You can see the status of what's happening behind the scenes. And then at the bottom, tucked away right now, you have to hit this button to expose it, is the debug and console area. This is where you're going to troubleshoot issues for your app or look at output that your app is generating. So we're going to close that for now because we're not going to need that. So those are the main areas of Xcode. Now let's take a look at how each of them is used in the context of this project to help you develop and build iOS apps. All right, let's dive into the project now. So remember, when you created this brand new project, it asked you where you want to save it to. Right, so let's pull up that location. I saved it on my desktop, and you can see there's a folder here. Inside that folder, there is an Xcode project file, product name.xcodeproj. That's the extension that opens up Xcode. And there is a folder containing all of the actual files for my project. We'll dive into what these files are in a second, but I just want to make a quick note that when you're sending your project to someone, you cannot send just that blue Xcode proj file. You have to send all the files, right? So go up one folder and zip up the entire folder. Okay, so the second thing I want to draw your attention to is I'm going to move this over here, the Navigator. So this Navigator, it contains different tabs to navigate different things, but by far you're going to be using this leftmost tab, which is the File Navigator. And it allows you to look at all of the different files in your project. As you can see, it maps to the actual files that were created. So this blue Xcode proj, this is that top node here, right? And then this folder, Xcode demo, you can see that folder right here. And if you open this up, you see the other files mapped here. So that's why this File Navigator is so important, because it allows you to edit all of your different files. Take a look at this. When I tap on a different file, the editor area changes to allow me to edit that file, depending on what that file is. So this is just a code file. That's why I don't see the canvas with the preview. Whereas content view, this is a view file, or it contains a view, and there is something to display. It's essentially a screen of our app. Okay, and if I click on assets, that's another type of file, which we're going to get into, so the editor area changes. Let's start by looking at the very first file up here. This is our project file. When I click on that, Xcode shows me a lot of configuration details for my project. And that's exactly what this project file is for. It allows me to indicate what platforms I want to target, what orientations I want to lock the app to, what's the minimum iOS version I want to target, and things like that. I can change my bundle identifier, version numbers, and so on. Now, there are a couple of different tabs across the top. I'm not going to go through each of them, but signing in capabilities, this allows you to add different abilities to your app, if you will. You can add Game Center, Health Kit, in-app purchases, and things like that. Maps, for example, this is where you would add those frameworks. Next, let's take a look at this first code file. What is this? Well, you can think of this as the entry point to your app. In other words, it's the code that gets run when your app is launched. So I'm going to gloss over some of this code and draw your attention to the most important bits for understanding. Take a look here. It says content view. Where have we seen that before? Well, we have a file in our project called content view. So let's click into that. This happens to be a view, or in other words, a screen of your app, and it's called content view. Here on the right hand side, there is a canvas because it is a view, so there's something to see. You can see that this is the representation of the code here. And the part which I'm going to highlight, which we won't go through right now, but we'll go through a little later in this video, this code is generating what you see here on the right hand side. Okay, so this is the first screen of our app. Why is it the first screen of our app? Well, let's go back to the app entry point, right? The code that gets run when your app is launched. Right here, it's creating an instance, or in other words, it's creating a content view essentially and displaying it to the user. And this is the content view. So when your app launches, it creates a content view and shows it to the user. And that's how you get this first screen of your app. Again, in the next part, when we dive into the editor area, I'll show you how to change some of this code, and we can visually see what happens as we change it. For now, let's go through the rest of our project files in the File Navigator. Next up, we have the assets library, and this is where you're going to add images, colors, app icons. You're going to define various color sets and themes, all to use during your coding in your app. You can reference all of those colors, all of those images to use in your app. Why don't we try adding an image together? I have one that I prepared here, and that is this Shiba Inu. Looks like this. Okay, but why do I have multiple copies of the same file? Well, this 2x one is double the size, and the 3x one is triple the size of my original image. And the reason why we add 3 different sizes of the image is because there are various Apple devices at different resolutions or pixel densities. So depending on which device the user is using, the OS or iOS will pick the right image to use. So I'm going to highlight all 3 of them and drag them into here. Don't worry if you don't have 3 different sizes of the same image. You can take the original one and just enlarge it 2 times and then 3 times in a graphics program such as Adobe Photoshop or Figma. But oftentimes when you do that, the 2x and 3x versions will be blurry. So what's better actually is to try to find a really large copy of the image and to scale it down into the 2x or 1x versions. Or better yet, if you have an illustration, if you can use vector graphics, those are scalable and you won't lose any sort of resolution. You can do some research into that if you want to search up vector graphics. But let's get back to the matter at hand here. We have an image asset which we just added into our asset library. Notice this asset name, Shiba Inu. We're going to have to spell it exactly like that in order to reference this image and display it in our app. Let's also add a color. So I want to show you what that looks like. If you right click here and you choose color set, I can choose this as like perhaps, let's name this the primary color. Then maybe the primary accent color or something like that. And by default, let's make it like a teal or something like that. Okay, something like that. And if it's dark mode, if the user has their device on dark mode, I could choose a different color. Maybe something that is like that. And so iOS will choose which color to use for my primary accent color, depending on whether the user is in light mode or dark mode. And this is how you can specify those things. In a little bit, I'll show you how we can access the color and the image which we've added inside of our content view. But for now, let's go through the rest of our project files. So we've got this preview content folder with a preview assets library or asset catalog. This is where you're going to add assets for your preview. These are things that you are including simply for preview or development purposes and not necessarily in your actual app when you put it into the App Store. Now that we've gone through our project files, let's see how we can start to edit some of them in the editor area. So as you saw before, this editor area really changes to allow you to edit the file. Right? For example, configuring the project properties versus editing code versus editing a view. I'm going to focus our time on editing views because that's where I feel like we're going to learn the most here. So first off, code on the left, preview on the right. What you see in the preview is a representation of the code itself. You can also adjust this. There's also some neat ways to navigate between different files in the editor area. There are arrows here going back and forward, and this works exactly like a web browser when you're going forward and back through your browsing history. There are different tabs here that you can switch across. You can create new tabs and things like that. And you can turn off your preview. If you're used to working just in code and you don't need a preview, you can say show editor only, even if it's a view, or you can bring out the canvas. And there are a lot of different options. You can rearrange the different panels. You can have split panels and so on and so forth. But I'm not going to get into that because I don't think you need to know that right now. What I do want to illustrate is showing you some of the code edits that we can do here and giving you like a very light introduction to Swift UI and building user interfaces using the code right here in the editor area. So even if you have never coded before and you haven't ever seen code, I think I can explain this in a way that you can understand. So first, look at this keyword here called VStack. V stands for vertical. So this is basically a vertical stack. And this is a layout container. So anything you put inside this container, it arranges it stacked vertically. There's also a horizontal stack, and you can probably guess if you put things inside that container, it arranges those elements horizontally. Well, let's take a look at this VStack. So what is contained inside of it? Well, it's everything between the opening curly bracket and the ending curly bracket. In other words, you see this keyword, the image and the text. These two elements are inside the VStack. So it's going to stack them up vertically. And if you look at the preview, you have an image of the globe and you have hello world as a text element. The globe is this image element right here. And the text, hello world, is this label over here. And because they are both inside the VStack, they're stacked on top of each other. Furthermore, the image is on top of the text because inside the code, it's arranged exactly in that way. Now, to help you visualize and see this code a little better, let me create some line breaks or some spacing. And it helps you visually separate the elements. And furthermore, what we can do is add something called a comment. So these are pieces of code that gets rendered or displayed onto the preview. But what I can do is add little messages or notes inside the code or in between the code using these two forward slashes. These are messages that the system doesn't treat them as code. So it's just like this part up here, all of these. These are all just notes for us. So I can say this is the image of the globe. This is the label. And this is the vertical stack. Now, the next thing you might be wondering is, why are we able to show a globe, this image, but this globe, this is the name right here of that asset, that globe is not inside our assets library. Where is that globe coming from? Well, there's an icon set in iOS that you can use. It comes with the system. All you need to know is what the system name of that icon is. Well, how do you access the set of icons? We're going to skip ahead a little bit here, but there's a plus icon here in the toolbar. If you hit that, this brings up what's called the library, and there are different tabs here. Let's go to the last tab. I'll explain the other ones in a little bit, but I want to show you where all of these icons, where you can find this library of icons. For example, we can search for pencil, and you can use all of these different ones. Take note of the name. This one's pencil, this one's pencil.circle, right? Pencil.circle.fill, so on and so forth. So let's use pencil.circle. You need that name, and you need to just, as long as you know the system name, if you specify it, it will be there and it'll show up. Okay, so I'm actually just going to erase the dot circle part, and I'm just going to use a basic pencil because I want this to stay in one line so it's easier for you to read. Next, I want to point your attention to these two lines of code, right? Dot something and then brackets with something in it. This is what's called a modifier. And both of these modifiers change how this image looks and behaves. So why don't we try removing this? See what happens. I'm going to turn to black, and it's about the same size, I would say. But image scale, this one, as the name implies, changes the size of the image. The dot large part, this is a parameter for the modifier. So this is how it modifies the image. This is specifying or configuring that modification. I could choose dot small, for example. And all I'm doing is hitting dot, brings up this menu, which gives me the options that I can put in there, and I can select small. And you can see that it got a little smaller. Now the second modifier, foreground style, changes the color or potentially other things as well of the icon, but the configuration is just to specify the tint color. Now tint is the default accent color. In iOS, the default tint color is this blue that you see here, but why don't we try changing it to the color that we specified inside our assets library? And if I go back here, we called it primary accent color, right, with spaces in between and capital letters for each word. And the way that we specify that is we have to type color followed by 2 rounded brackets, and inside we put the name of the color. Yeah, so you can see our colors right there. Let me change this back to large so it's a little easier to see. It's still hard to see because of the color that we chose, but the point that I want to make here is that these are modifiers and they modify the image element right here. We could also modify the text label right here by adding different modifiers to it. So let me show you what that looks like. Dot, and then it brings up this autocomplete menu, which gives us options. So for example, one easy one is just to choose bold, and it will bold the text. Furthermore, if I wanted to change my text to the same color, I can add the foreground style modifier to my text. This modifier works for both images or icons and text. So now my text is the same hard to read color. Why don't we try looking at this app in dark mode? There are some special features of the preview canvas that let us configure how we preview it. If we take a look at this icon here, you can turn on color scheme. So that's how it would look in dark mode. That's how it would look in light mode. Now light mode is really hard to read, so I might go back to my assets and I might say for light mode, why don't we use a darker color so it's slightly easier to read. I mean, those would all be hard to read, but let me just use that. For example, for light mode, if we go back to our content view and we wait for the preview to load, and then we click on this. So in dark mode, it looks like that. In light mode, it looks pretty much black, but I'm sure that is the primary color that I chose here. It looks a little dark. That might be also hard to read. Appearances, any light or dark. Okay. Yeah, there we go. It's a little hard to see, but it is the color that I chose. There we go. And I guess we're talking about zooming in and zooming out. So furthermore here, you can toggle different orientations so you can see what your app looks like in portrait mode or different orientations, and there's various things like that. So just in the last 5 minutes, I've explained this code, and I'm sure even if you haven't seen any code before, that you can read this code and you can understand that why this code right here generates what you see here on the right hand side. And that's how building user interfaces feels like in Swift UI. It's very intuitive, and once you get the hang of it, you probably wouldn't even need the preview and you can just write this code. Furthermore, if you don't understand what sorts of modifiers are available or what sort of parameters you can specify for each modifier, there's an easy visual way to do that. And that brings us to the next section, which is the inspector. So you might have noticed that as we were coding and we were clicking on these different pieces of code, that what you saw on this inspector panel was changing. And that's because depending on what your cursor is on and what your file is active, it shows different options. Let's start at the top. For example, if we take a look at this project node, you can see the full path of where it is. You can customize some different things. If we take a look at an image asset, let's say, an image asset like this, you can also see different things you can change about that image, some details about it, some colors. Right? That's where we're customizing the color actually. We're already using the inspector panel. And furthermore, there are a few different tabs, just like the Navigator, there are different tabs. See? So now let's go into a code area. Let's take a look at a VStack. Now this one is about the identity and the type of what it is, the file that is. If I go into this tab, this is a quick help tab, which gives you information about the VStack. It shows you a code example and a little tutorial. That's a great way to look at things that you're unfamiliar with. For example, I can click on the image and it has the same sort of thing. Shows me some of the available options. If I click into this one, it lets me configure different things about it. So for example, let's click the VStack. I can add some spacing between the elements if I would like. For example, the image and the text, they're stacked right up against each other. But if I increase the spacing like this, let's increase it by a bit more so you can see, let's say 50 or 100 even. You can see that they're spaced really far apart. Right? I have to hit enter actually. There it is. That's 100. And you can also see how it affects the code. You see it added a parameter to the VStack. It added this part, right? And it shows how you would configure the VStack using code if you wanted spacing between the elements to be 100. But I did it through the inspector panel, right? So it's a visual way of configuration. What else can I do? What if I clicked this alignment and I clicked align them to the right? You can see now they're aligned to the right. So let me change that back to the center. And you can see here, it actually specified the alignment to be the center, but by default, it's at the center anyway. So even if you don't specify alignment to be center, it's already centered. So I can delete that piece of code. Now this is the cool thing. Let's go to the image right now. There's a lot more things you can configure with the image, but what I want to draw your attention to is down here, the add modifier box right here. It shows me, just by clicking into it, the different types of modifiers I can specify on that image element. There's blur, border, brightness, contrast, corner radius, hover effect, all these different things. Right? Before I add a modifier, let me just specify, I just remembered we need to take a look at how we're gonna show the Shiba Inu image. Why don't we do that? What if we just typed in Shiba Inu like this? It doesn't show up, right? Even though I spelled it exactly like how the image asset is in our library, it still doesn't show up. And that's because we don't use system name when we are referencing assets in the library. You only use system name for those icons in the system. So I can remove that, and lo and behold, we get the image of our Shiba Inu. Let's try adding a modifier to it now. So I'm going to click here. We're going to use the inspect panel to add, let's say a blur to it. A blur radius 3. That is the strength of the blur. So you can see that's applied to it right there. And so this inspector panel is a great way to learn about different modifiers that you can add to different elements. Right now I have some rounded images, corners I mean. And then let's go back and change the text here. Instead of hello world, we'll label it as a Shiba Inu, and then furthermore, we'll reduce the spacing to that. Let's talk about the toolbar across the top now. You'll see that there's this corner button, hide or show the inspectors. If we click on these buttons, essentially hides and shows these panels, which gives us more space for editing the code and looking at the preview, which is great for laptop displays or smaller screens. We also have the library icon, which we went over before. We also have this status right here, which tells us what's happening. On the left-hand side here, we have the target that we want to run. And this matters when we have a larger Xcode project with multiple smaller targets or projects in it. For now, we have just one, so it doesn't really make a difference. But this menu this second drop down is really important. This is where do you want to run your app on in terms of previewing it. So if we plugged in our device onto the computer, it would show up here, and we can run this app and install it on a physical device. And you can actually then unplug your phone afterwards and show people on your device. Or you can run your app on one of the many simulators. And this is a virtual device that appears on your screen that you can use to interact with your app. So I'm going to show you how that works in a second. For now, let's just choose iPhone 15 Pro. This is the run button. This will actually install this app either on the simulator or on whatever physical device you've selected. So it basically runs your project. If you tap and hold it, there are a couple of other things that you can do, which we won't get into at the moment. I want to draw your attention back to the library because there are a couple of different tabs here. Now this first tab has a collection of the different views that you can add to your user interface. So you saw VStack, which is a layout container. You saw the image element. You saw the text element. There are color pickers, buttons, date pickers, forms, labels, links, lists, menu, and so on and so forth. This is a great way to just explore Swift UI and what sorts of components you can add to the view. Furthermore, this tab gives you modifiers. So you saw in the inspector panel how we could add modifier and we get a list. This is another way to look at the different types of modifiers. So you see blur, that's the one we used before. If you just tap it, you can get a description of what it does and how it would look in code. Same thing goes for these views. If you tap on one of them, you can get a code sample, you can learn a little bit more about it and things like that. These are different code blocks, which if you get into Swift, then we can dive into that. But for now, we're not going to do that. This is another way to access your asset library. The great thing about the library is that it's all drag and drop. So you open this, you can just grab this and you can drop it into your code. That's how you would display the Shiba Inu. Right? If I put this inside of our VStack, right, you'd get two of them. One of them has rounded corners because we have the modifiers. The other one doesn't, so it's got straight corners. But the same thing goes for the other things in the library, right? You could just drag one of these things, such as a button, right, into your VStack. Let's just put it right there, for example. You've got a button, and then you could explore what the code looks like and start playing around with it. So the library is really useful, as is the inspector. But over time, as you play around and you code longer, you're not going to need the library. You're not going to need the inspector. It's just going to be faster for you to type a couple of letters, have autocomplete pop up, choose the thing you want, and just type and code everything by hand like that. Great that Xcode gives you various ways to go about doing the same thing. All right, so that's the toolbar in a nutshell. Let's try running our project on the simulator and see what happens. If I hit run, if you're doing this for the first time, it might take a couple of minutes at first. It says build succeeded. If there was like an error in your code or something like that, you would get a error and it won't be able to run your project until you fix it. But it said build succeeded, which means there are no errors, and it launched this virtual simulator. And then it ran my app on it. Now, why would I need a simulator if I have the preview? Well, that's a great question. There's lots of things that you can do in the preview. You can even interact with it, right? But there are also lots of things that you cannot do in the preview. For example, using the simulator, you can take screenshots and you can simulate different things. You can simulate a location. For example, if you are using maps, you're trying to track the user using GPS, you can simulate custom locations and specify a lat long. You can even specify a moving target, for example, a freeway drive, and the coordinates will actually change so you can test your app. You can trigger different text sizes. You can trigger Face ID, Apple Pay. You can also simulate a low memory situation, slow animations, what would happen in your app. So there's lots of things you can change and simulate so you can test your app in as realistic of an environment as possible. Although actually putting it on your phone and testing it would probably be the best if you have a device. And furthermore, inside this simulator, it's almost like an actual phone. You can add contacts, you can specify different settings and things like that. And it's as real as you can get without having a real device. So the preview is really meant for development, just to see what it is that you have. You can interact it with a little bit in a limited way. The next step up would be testing it in the simulator, and the best thing would be testing it on an actual device. All right, so let's go ahead and do that now. Let's put this little app on an actual device. All right, so I'm gonna plug in my phone to my computer right now, and Xcode, if it's the first time you're doing it, it's gonna pop up a little menu on your phone saying, should you trust this computer? And obviously you should hit trust. And if it's the first time, it'll also try to get your phone ready for development. So that usually takes a couple of minutes. Because my phone has been used before, that stuff is bypassed, and now I can select my phone as the destination of where I want to install this app into. So I'm going to choose my phone, and then I am going to hit run to install the app on my phone. But before I do that, let me open up QuickTime Player and give you a view of my phone. And if you didn't know you could do this, you just hit this little arrow here and you can select the source of what you want to see as long as your phone is plugged in. So let me now run the app on my phone, and then you're going to see it pop up on my phone. So this is my actual device here. It just takes a while the first time. If it doesn't work, you can hit stop and you can try to do it again. So it's saying running, something's happening, give it a little while. There it goes. Because I'm running dark mode on my phone, you can see that it looks a little different. Notice that it's not completely the same. There is a little bit of a margin on my actual device, right? Whereas on the simulator, it doesn't show that. So that's why I'm saying that testing on an actual device would be the most accurate, because it's what your users who download your app would see. Now, the other thing that is cool is that after I hit stop, if I show you here, my app is still here. I can launch this at any time. So let me just launch this. Oh, sorry, this is the simulator. What am I doing? Here it is. You can see that it's still there, right? So I can launch it from my phone. Like I can disconnect my phone and I can launch that app at any time. So I could bring it around and show my friends, show my family. The thing to note though, is that in about 7 or 14 days, I forget, it's either 7 or 14 days, you'll get a message that said the build has expired and you're gonna need to plug in your phone and do this process over again to reinstall it. So it's meant for testing purposes. It's not meant for you to keep that app on your phone for perpetuity. If you want to keep it on your phone longer, you're gonna need to sign up for the Apple Developer Program, which Apple charges a yearly fee for. And that allows you to install the apps on your phone on a more permanent basis. And you can also deploy apps into the App Store, as many as you want. So that's a yearly fee to Apple. And that's how you install apps on your phone, to show your friends and family what you're building. Now, we didn't go through the debug and the console area down here. That's more of when we are writing more Swift code and we need to troubleshoot and figure out some stuff. For now, going through it, I think would be overkill for this tutorial and at this point in your journey. But I do recommend you go from here to our beginner 8-day series, which I'll link to in the upper right hand corner. It's the best starting point to learn app development using Swift UI and Swift and start building your own apps. In fact, in those 8 lessons, you will be building your first app. And I don't mean an app like this that does nothing. I mean an actual card game that does something. And that's when it would be more prudent for you to actually learn how to debug and troubleshoot your code. So that's my Xcode tutorial. You learned about how to download Xcode, all of the main areas of Xcode, how to navigate around it, and you learned a little bit about building user interfaces using SwiftUI as well. If there's anything you feel like was missing, please comment below and I'll try my best to record a follow-up video. And if you want to continue what you learned today and continue building on those skills, I highly recommend that you check out our 8-day beginner series right over there. And lastly, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it greatly if you shared it with someone you know who's also interested in app development. That would help this channel out so much. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.